Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a visionary leader, a creative genius, and one of the most influential figures in the history of modern technology. Born on February 24, 1955 in San Francisco, California, and adopted shortly after birth. By Paul and Clara Jobs, Steve showed an early interest in electronics and invention. From a young age, he was curious, unconventional, and driven by a desire to explore how things worked. He grew up in Silicon Valley, where technology and innovation were already beginning to bloom. After briefly attending Reed College, Jobs dropped out to find his own path, which led him to travel to India in search of spiritual enlightenment. These experiences deeply shaped his unique perspective on life and business. In 1976, along with his friend Steve Wozniak, he co-founded Apple Computer in his parents' garage. What started as a small project would eventually revolutionize the entire world of personal computing. Jobs was not an engineer himself, but he had a rare ability to see the big picture, connect technology with human experience, and insist on elegance, simplicity, and excellence in design. He was known for his perfectionism, his passion for creating products that delighted users, and his belief that technology should empower individuals. Under his leadership, Apple introduced iconic products like the Macintosh, iPod, iPhone, and iPad, devices that didn't just change the way we communicate or work, but also how we live. Steve's journey was not without hardships. He was even fired from his own company in 1985, but he returned years later to rescue Apple from the brink of collapse and lead it to become one of the most valuable companies in the world. Beyond Apple, he also played a crucial role in the success of Pixar animation studios, helping to bring to life animated classics like Toy Story. Jobs' life was a story of passion, perseverance, imagination, and the courage to think differently. He taught the world that with the right mix of creativity and determination, it's possible to shape the future. His legacy continues to inspire millions of people across the globe to follow their dreams, challenge the status quo, and never settle for less than greatness. Chapter 1, A Humble Beginning, 1955. The story of Steve Jobs, a man who would one day revolutionize the world through technology and design, began not with fanfare or luxury, but with simplicity, uncertainty, and humble beginnings. He was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California, to a young unmarried couple, Joanne Schiebel, a college student from a strict Catholic family, and Abdul Fattah Jandali, a Syrian immigrant, studying political science. Although they loved their child, they were not ready to raise him, and societal pressures made it difficult for them to stay together. With heavy hearts, they made the painful decision to give their newborn son up for adoption, hoping he would have a better life than they could offer at the time. That hope came true when Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple from Mountain View, California, adopted him and named him Stephen Paul Jobs. Paul Jobs, a mechanic and carpenter who never finished high school, taught young Steve the basics of craftsmanship and the importance of doing things well, even if no one else would notice. Clara, an accountant and devoted mother, gave Steve a deep sense of love and security. Though the Jobs family had little money, they were rich in support and encouragement. They lived in a small house in what would later become known as Silicon Valley, a place that would play a major role in Steve's destiny. Even as a child, Steve was different. He was curious, deeply imaginative, and sometimes rebellious. He loved taking things apart to understand how they worked, especially electronics. Paul would bring home spare parts and show Steve how to fix things, sparking a fascination with machines that would last a lifetime. Steve's early life was not always easy. He sometimes felt like an outsider, especially when he learned at a young age that he was adopted. Though his parents always made it clear he was chosen and deeply loved, Steve struggled with questions about identity and belonging. But instead of letting this hold him back, he used it as fuel for his creativity and determination. His childhood was filled with long walks, questions about the universe, and hands-on experiments in the garage. He wasn't the type to follow rules blindly, something that would later become one of his most defining traits. These early years laid the foundation for the man he would become: bold, curious, independent, and endlessly driven to build something that truly mattered. From the very beginning, Steve Jobs' life was shaped by contrast. Between loss and love, limits and possibilities, hardship and hope. And from those humble beginnings, a legend was born. Chapter 2: A Curious Mind. The School Years. As Steve Jobs moved into his school years, his natural curiosity and unconventional thinking became even more apparent. From the very beginning, Steve was not an ordinary student. He was intelligent, imaginative, and full of questions. But he didn't like to follow the rules just for the sake of following them. He found traditional classroom settings to be boring and rigid, often clashing with teachers who expected quiet obedience rather than creativity and independent thought. In elementary school, Steve was so bored and uninterested that he would play pranks just to entertain himself. But one teacher, Imogene Hill, saw something special in him. She challenged and encouraged Steve in a way that few others did. She fed his hunger for knowledge by giving him extra books and letting him explore topics far beyond the standard curriculum. Thanks to her support, Steve skipped the 5th grade and moved directly into middle school, a rare and impressive accomplishment that reflected his advanced intellect. However, middle school and high school were not easy for him. Steve was often bullied, and he felt out of place among his classmates. He described himself as a loner who didn't easily fit in with others, preferring instead to spend time with electronics, books, and a few close friends. He became fascinated with machines, especially anything involving circuits and wires. During these years, he met Steve Wozniak, a brilliant and kind-hearted boy who shared his passion for electronics and invention. Though Wozniak was a few years older, the two became fast friends, bonding over their love of computers and practical jokes. Together, they built early gadgets, and even created a device called the Blue Box that allowed people to make free long-distance calls, a mischievous but clever invention that revealed just how bold and inventive they already were. Outside the classroom, Steve was growing in unexpected ways. He was beginning to ask deeper questions about life, philosophy, and human purpose. Influenced by books like Autobiography of a Yogi, he became interested in spirituality and alternative lifestyles. This early curiosity about the deeper meaning of existence would stay with him for the rest of his life, influencing not only his personal beliefs, but also the way he approached technology as something that should not just function, but also inspire and connect people emotionally. While most students were busy thinking about tests and grades, Steve was dreaming of bigger things. He was thinking about how the world worked, how ideas were born, and how he might one day change the world himself. Even though he struggled to fit into the traditional mold of school, his experiences there shaped his identity. They taught him to trust his instincts, challenge the status quo, and value creativity over conformity. These school years weren't easy, but they helped Steve Jobs become the fearless thinker and passionate innovator the world would come to admire. Chapter 3: College, Zen, and the Search for Meaning, 1972-1974. After graduating from high school in 1972, Steve Jobs entered a new and uncertain chapter in his life, one filled with questions, exploration, and a deep hunger for meaning. He enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, a small liberal arts school known for its free-thinking atmosphere and rigorous academics. Although Steve was intelligent and curious, he quickly found that traditional college life didn't suit him. The classes felt too rigid, and the high cost of tuition placed a heavy burden on his working-class parents. After just one semester, Steve made a bold decision. He dropped out of Reed College. But instead of leaving campus entirely, he stayed, sleeping on friends' floors, returning Coke bottles for spare change, and eating free meals at a nearby Hare Krishna temple. He continued to audit classes that genuinely interested him, especially in philosophy, literature, and calligraphy. One calligraphy course in particular would leave a lasting impact, its emphasis on beauty, elegance, and the fine details of design would later inspire the typography of the first Macintosh computer. It was during this time that Steve began to explore not just the world around him, but the world within. Steve was deeply influenced by the countercultural movement of the 1970s. He began reading spiritual texts and experimenting with alternative lifestyles, questioning the materialism of modern life, and seeking something deeper, something beyond money or fame. He was drawn to Eastern philosophies, particularly Zen Buddhism, which emphasized simplicity, mindfulness, and inner peace. This quest for enlightenment eventually led him to travel to India in 1974 with his friend Daniel Kotke. There, Steve walked barefoot through villages, lived simply, and sought out spiritual teachers who might help him uncover the truths he was searching for. Though the trip didn't provide all the answers he was hoping for, it left a powerful imprint on his mind and soul. He returned to California with his head shaved, wearing traditional Indian clothing, and carrying a stronger sense of self. His experiences during this time helped shape his lifelong belief in intuition, simplicity, and the idea that true innovation comes from connecting the heart with the mind. During these years, Steve Jobs wasn't focused on building a business or becoming wealthy. He was focused on understanding life itself. This period of searching, though often seen as unconventional or unproductive, by others helped lay the philosophical foundation for his future work. It taught him to see beauty in simplicity, to value intuition over logic, and to believe in following one's inner voice, even when the path seemed unclear. These formative years between 1972 and 1974 were not about making money or building products. They were about building Steve, a restless soul with a sharp mind, a fierce will, and a deep desire to do something meaningful in the world. He was slowly becoming the visionary that would later change the way people live, communicate, and create. His college years, though brief and unconventional, were a vital part of his journey, a time when he planted the seeds of the philosophy that would guide him for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. Apple is Born, 1976. In 1976, a momentous event took place in a small, cluttered garage in Los Altos, California, an event that would eventually change the course of technology and the world itself. This was the year Apple was born. The brainchild of a young and ambitious Steve Jobs, his brilliant and soft-spoken friend Steve Wozniak, and a few early supporters who believed in a bold dream. Jobs, only 21 at the time, had recently returned from his spiritual journey to India and was working at Atari, a video game company. Meanwhile, Wozniak had developed a homemade computer prototype, a simple yet groundbreaking device that could display text and be connected to a keyboard and screen, features that were revolutionary at the time. When Jobs saw Wozniak's invention, he immediately recognized its potential not just as a tool for tech enthusiasts, but as a product that could one day sit in every home and change the way people worked, learned, and communicated. Where Wozniak saw a hobby, Jobs saw a future. With Jobs' vision and Wozniak's engineering brilliance, the two Steves decided to start a company, and so Apple Computer was born on April 1st, 1976. They named it Apple because Jobs had recently visited an apple orchard while on a fruitarian diet, and he thought the name sounded simple, fun, and not intimidating, exactly how he wanted technology to feel. To fund their first project, Jobs sold his beloved Volkswagen van, and Wozniak sold his HP calculator, a sign of their deep belief and commitment to the idea. They started building the first product, the Apple I, in Jobs' parents' garage. It wasn't a sleek machine like today's devices. It was just a circuit board, but it was powerful enough to attract attention. Jobs persuaded a local computer store, the Byte Shop, to buy 50 units, and just like that, Apple had its first customer. From that tiny seed, something incredible began to grow. Jobs wasn't just selling a computer, he was selling a vision. That computers didn't have to be complicated or limited to scientists and hobbyists. He believed technology should be personal, accessible, and beautiful. He pushed for designs that were friendly and user-centered, even at a time when most computers looked like confusing boxes of wires. He wanted Apple to stand at the intersection of technology and the arts, combining function with form. It was during this early phase that Jobs' personality as a leader truly began to shine, driven, persuasive, demanding, but also incredibly passionate and inspiring. He saw the future before others did, and he was willing to work relentlessly to bring it into reality. The birth of Apple wasn't just the launch of a company, it was the birth of a movement. A movement that said innovation doesn't require wealth, only vision, that a garage can be more powerful than a corporate office, and that a few determined individuals guided by passion and purpose can absolutely change the world. Chapter 5, Rise and Fall, 1980-1985. Between 1980 and 1985, Steve Jobs experienced both extraordinary success and a painful fall, two sides of a journey that would shape him into the visionary the world would later admire. By 1980, just 4 years after Apple's humble beginnings in a garage, the company had become a rising star in Silicon Valley. Apple went public in December of that year, making Steve Jobs a millionaire overnight at just 25 years old. The initial public offering, IPO, was one of the biggest in American history, and suddenly, the young man who once slept on friends' floors in college was leading one of the most exciting tech companies in the world. The Apple II was already a major success, bringing personal computing into homes, schools, and small businesses across the country. But Steve wasn't content to stop there. He dreamed of building a revolutionary computer, one that was not only powerful but also elegant, simple, and intuitive for everyday users. That dream became reality in 1984 with the launch of the Macintosh, a computer that broke all the rules. It had a graphical user interface, a mouse, and a sleek design unlike anything the world had seen before. Its famous Super Bowl commercial, directed by Ridley Scott, boldly declared that 1984 would not be like 1984. Positioning Apple as the rebel against the corporate giant IBM. The Macintosh was visionary. It would eventually change the way people interacted with technology, but at the time, it was ahead of its era. It was expensive, underpowered, and didn't sell as well as Apple had hoped. Behind the scenes, Jobs' intense personality began to cause friction. He was known for being charismatic and inspiring, but also demanding, impulsive, and hard to work with. His perfectionism and emotional leadership style clashed with many colleagues and executives, especially John Scully, the CEO Jobs had personally recruited from Pepsi. As tensions grew inside the company, Jobs found himself increasingly isolated. Despite his early success, the board of directors began to lose confidence in his ability to lead. In 1985, after a dramatic internal power struggle, Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple, the very company he had created. It was a crushing blow. At just 30 years old, Steve had gone from being a celebrated prodigy to being pushed aside by his own team. For many, this would have been the end of the story. But for Jobs, it was the beginning of a powerful transformation. Though he was devastated, humiliated, and uncertain of what would come next, this fall would eventually lead him to some of his most important growth, personally and professionally. This chapter in his life was filled with painful lessons, but it also taught him humility, resilience, and the value of failure. As Steve would later say, getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to him. The heaviness of success was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, free to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. Chapter 6, Reinvention, Next and Pixar. After being forced out of Apple in 1985, Steve Jobs found himself at a crossroads, no longer at the helm of the company he had built, unsure of what came next. But rather than retreat, he used this time to reinvent himself. With the same fire and ambition that had fueled Apple, Steve launched a new company called Next Inc., aiming to build a computer for higher education and research. The vision behind Next was bold. Create a sleek, powerful, and beautifully designed workstation that could help scientists and students change the world. The Next computer was visually stunning and technologically advanced, featuring innovations like the Next Step operating system and an early version of what we now recognize as app-based software development. But the machine was too expensive, and like the original Macintosh, it struggled to find commercial success. Still, the work done at Next would later play a crucial role in the future of computing. In fact, the software foundation, built at Next, would eventually become the core of Apple's future operating systems, including Mac OS and iOS. More importantly, Next was a place where Jobs matured as a leader, learning how to manage teams, accept failure, and think even more deeply about the marriage of technology and design. But Steve's reinvention didn't stop there. Around the same time, in 1986, he made what seemed like a side investment that would unexpectedly change the world of entertainment forever. He purchased a small, struggling graphics division from George Lucas for $10 million and renamed it Pixar. At first, Pixar focused on selling high-end animation software to other companies, but that business didn't take off. However, Steve believed in the potential of computer animation to transform storytelling. He supported the creative team, including John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, even when profits were nowhere in sight. Years of hard work and experimentation finally paid off in 1995 with the release of Toy Story, the world's first full-length computer-animated film. It was a groundbreaking success, both technically and emotionally, blending cutting-edge animation with a heartfelt human story. Toy Story became a global phenomenon, and Pixar went on to create a string of hits like Finding Nemo, Monsters, Inc., and The Incredibles, redefining animation forever. During this period, Steve Jobs was no longer just a tech entrepreneur. He had become a creative force across industries. While Next refined his approach to innovation, Pixar allowed him to embrace storytelling, design, and emotional connection in ways he hadn't before. These experiences changed him deeply. He became more thoughtful, more patient, and more focused on quality over ego. Ironically, it was this period, after being fired from Apple, when Steve Jobs did some of the most important work of his life. He rebuilt himself from the ground up, sharpening his skills, expanding his vision, and preparing for an unexpected comeback. Though the world saw his departure from Apple as a failure, Steve used it as a time to grow into a wiser, more balanced, and even more visionary leader. What he didn't know was that the best, and perhaps most legendary, part of his journey was still ahead. Chapter 7, The Return of the King, 1997-2001. By 1997, Apple was on the verge of collapse. The company that Steve Jobs had once built with passion and vision had lost its way. Sales were falling, products were confusing, and innovation had stalled. Ironically, it was at this moment of crisis that Apple turned back to the man it had once pushed out. After more than a decade apart, Steve Jobs returned, not just as a former founder, but as the company's last, best hope. His return began when Apple acquired Next, the very company Steve had created during his time away. The move was strategic. It brought back Jobs along with Next's powerful operating system, which would eventually become the foundation for future Apple software. When Steve stepped back into Apple, he found a company that was disorganized, unfocused, and losing relevance. But rather than be overwhelmed, he rolled up his sleeves, took charge, and began making bold decisions that would shock the tech world. Jobs immediately began simplifying everything. He slashed dozens of failing products, reorganized teams, and focused Apple's energy on doing fewer things, but doing them better. Focus and simplicity, he believed, were the keys to bringing Apple back. His first big moment came in 1998 with the launch of the iMac, a computer that was fast, colorful, and most importantly, beautiful. It didn't look like any computer on the market. With its friendly design, transparent case, and easy setup, the iMac reignited public excitement and made Apple cool again. But more than a product, it was a symbol of the new Apple, bold, stylish, and centered around the user experience. Under Steve's leadership, the company also partnered with its former rival Microsoft to stabilize finances. A surprising but strategic move that showed Jobs was now thinking about survival and long-term vision, not just pride. During this period, Jobs also changed the culture of Apple. He inspired his teams to believe again, not just in the company, but in the idea that technology could be meaningful, even magical. He emphasized design, creativity, and the emotional connection between users and their devices. In 2001, Steve took the next leap forward by launching Mac OS X, a completely modern operating system based on Next technology, which combined power with simplicity. That same year, Apple opened its first Apple stores, redefining the retail experience and creating physical spaces where people could connect directly with the products and the brand. But perhaps most revolutionary of all, in October 2001, Steve introduced the iPod, a tiny, sleek music player that put 1,000 songs in your pocket. It wasn't just a music device. It was the beginning of a digital lifestyle that would reshape entertainment, design, and culture. This chapter in Steve Jobs' life was not just about saving Apple. It was about transforming it into something entirely new. He didn't return as the same brash young man from the 1980s. He had matured. Now he was a wiser, more focused leader who had learned from failure, grown through adversity, and come back with a clearer sense of purpose. He had reimagined Apple from the ground up and turned it from a struggling tech company into a symbol of innovation and inspiration. His return wasn't just a business move, it was a legendary comeback story. Steve Jobs had come home, and with him came the rebirth of Apple, setting the stage for a future no one could have predicted. Chapter 8. The Golden Era. iPod, iPhone, iPad. From the early 2000s onward, Steve Jobs entered what many call the golden era of his career, a period where his vision, creativity, and leadership led to a series of innovations that didn't just change Apple, but reshaped entire industries and forever altered the way people live, communicate, and connect. It began with the iPod in 2001, a pocket-sized music player that was unlike anything the world had seen before. Where other MP3 players were clunky and complicated, the iPod was elegant, easy to use, and incredibly powerful. Jobs understood that it wasn't just about the device, it was about the experience. So he paired the iPod with iTunes, a digital store that let users easily buy and organize music. With this, Apple didn't just make a product, it created a whole new ecosystem. Music went from being stored on shelves in CDs to being carried effortlessly in your pocket. The iPod became a cultural icon, and iPod became synonymous with portable music. But Steve Jobs was just getting started. Behind the scenes, he had set his sights on something even bigger: the mobile phone. At the time, cell phones were basic, ugly, and frustrating to use. Jobs wanted to create a device that could combine a phone, a music player, and an internet browser into one seamless, beautiful experience. After years of secret development, he unveiled the iPhone in 2007, and the world was never the same. With its sleek design, multi-touch screen, and intuitive interface, the iPhone felt like something from the future. It wasn't just a phone. It was a pocket-sized computer, a camera, a communication tool, and a platform for apps that would transform everything from gaming and banking to education and healthcare. The App Store, launched in 2008, turned the iPhone into a global platform for innovation, empowering developers everywhere and giving users access to a universe of tools and entertainment. The iPhone redefined not only what a phone could do, but what technology could be. It became one of the most successful and influential products in human history. As if changing the music and phone industries weren't enough, Jobs then turned his attention to a new kind of device: the iPad. Launched in 2010, the iPad was a sleek, lightweight tablet that allowed people to browse the web, read books, watch videos, play games, and work, all with the touch of a finger. Critics initially doubted its usefulness, but once again, Jobs had anticipated what people wanted before they even knew they wanted it. The iPad created an entirely new category of devices, sitting perfectly between the smartphone and the laptop. It became a favorite tool for students, artists, doctors, business people, and everyday users alike. Together, the iPod, iPhone, and iPad formed a trilogy of revolutionary products that didn't just win over customers, they changed the world. What made this era truly golden wasn't just the technology, but the philosophy behind it. Jobs believed that great products happen when technology meets the humanities, when logic and intuition, science and art blend into something human. He obsessed over every detail, from how a button felt to the sound a device made when you tapped it. He pushed his teams relentlessly, demanding excellence, but also inspiring them to build things that mattered. Under his leadership, Apple became more than a tech company. It became a symbol of innovation, elegance, and possibility. This chapter of Steve Jobs' life marked the peak of his powers. It was a time when all the lessons of his past, the curiosity of his youth, the pain of failure, the patience he learned at Next and Pixar, came together in perfect harmony. He didn't just lead a company, he led a revolution. And in doing so, he helped shape the digital age we live in today. Chapter 9. The Man Behind the Magic. Behind the groundbreaking inventions, the captivating keynotes, and the sleek Apple products that transformed modern life, there was a complex and deeply human figure, Steve Jobs, the man behind the magic. To many, he was a genius, a revolutionary thinker who seemed to see the future before it arrived. But beyond the stage lights and product launches was a man of contradictions. Brilliant yet stubborn, deeply intuitive yet fiercely demanding, often inspiring but sometimes difficult to work with. Steve Jobs was not just an inventor, he was an artist of ideas, a storyteller, who believed that technology should serve the soul, not just the mind. He was driven by an unshakable belief that great things are not done by compromise, but by passion, precision, and persistence. He would walk into a room, ask the impossible, and somehow inspire people to reach higher than they thought they could. His standards were relentless, but his vision was clear: to build products that didn't just work, but that made people feel something: joy, wonder, empowerment. Jobs was also a man shaped by his personal experiences. Being adopted as a baby left him with questions about identity and belonging, but it also fueled his lifelong desire to leave a mark. His early experiments with Zen Buddhism, psychedelics, and spiritual searching gave him a sense of minimalism and mindfulness that echoed in every Apple product. The calm, clean design of a Mac or an iPhone wasn't just aesthetic. It reflected Steve's belief in simplicity, in stripping away the unnecessary to reveal the essential. He saw beauty in both technology and silence, and he often said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." That philosophy didn't come from business school. It came from who he was. At home, he could be intensely private. He had a complex relationship with his first daughter, Lisa, but later grew into a devoted father to the children he had with his wife, Laureen Powell Jobs. As he matured, he began to reflect more on the legacy he would leave behind, not just through Apple, but through his impact on people, on education, on creativity. He wasn't perfect. He could be harsh, temperamental, and even cold at times. But those who worked closely with him often described a kind of magic in his presence, a clarity of purpose and a force of will that pushed boundaries and brought ideas to life. He was obsessed with excellence, often saying, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." And he meant it. Whether it was the curve of an iPhone's glass or the scroll of a music menu, Steve Jobs believed that every detail mattered, because people matter. In the end, the man behind the magic was not just a CEO or a tech pioneer. He was a visionary who made machines feel human, who connected art with engineering, and who reminded the world that it's okay to think differently. His story is not just about business success. It's about the power of belief, the beauty of simplicity, and the extraordinary things that can happen. when one person dares to follow their inner voice. Steve Jobs didn't just invent products, he sparked revolutions. And more importantly, he showed us what was possible when creativity, courage, and conviction come together in a single life. Chapter 10, Farewell, 2011. In 2011, the world had to say goodbye to one of its most influential and visionary minds, Steve Jobs. After years of battling a rare form of pancreatic cancer, Steve passed away on October 5, 2011, at the age of 56. His death marked the end of an extraordinary era, not only for Apple, but for the entire world of technology, design, and innovation. Though his physical presence faded, the impact of his work, ideas, and spirit continued to echo across the globe. His passing wasn't just the loss of a CEO. It felt deeply personal to millions. People mourned not just the man who created the iPhone or Mac, but the dreamer who made technology feel magical, who taught the world to think different, and who showed us that passion and creativity could truly change everything. In the months leading up to his death, Steve grew increasingly frail, yet he remained dedicated to his work. Even as his health declined, he was still involved in the development of new Apple products, guiding the team, shaping ideas, and leaving behind a blueprint for the future. He officially resigned as Apple's CEO in August 2011, handing the reins to Tim Cook, a trusted colleague and friend who had long supported the company's operations. In his resignation letter, Jobs humbly wrote, "I believe Apple's brightest and most innovative days are ahead of it." These words weren't just hopeful. They reflected his deep belief in the teams he built, the values he had infused into the company, and the future he envisioned even without him. His death brought an outpouring of grief and gratitude. Tributes came from world leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, students, and everyday people. Crowds gathered outside Apple stores, worldwide, leaving flowers, sticky notes, apples with bites taken out, and heartfelt messages. In Silicon Valley, where Steve had grown up and shaped so much of the modern digital age, the mood was somber but thankful. President Barack Obama said, "Steve was among the greatest of American innovators, brave enough to think differently, bold enough to believe he could change the world, and talented enough to do it." To many, he wasn't just an entrepreneur, he was a symbol of possibility. Though Steve Jobs is no longer with us, his influence remains woven into the fabric of daily life. Every time someone touches a screen, listens to music on their phone, edits a photo with a swipe, or marvels at the elegance of design merged with powerful technology, they are touching a part of Steve's legacy. His farewell was not an end, but a turning point. He had built something greater than himself, a culture of innovation, a belief in excellence, and a mission to empower people through technology. In his famous Stanford commencement speech in 2005, he told graduates, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." Those words now live on as a lasting echo of his philosophy, not just for business, but for life. Chapter 10 is not simply a goodbye. It's a reminder of how one person, driven by vision, passion, and resilience, can leave a permanent mark on the world. Steve Jobs may have departed from this earth, but his spirit lives on. In every elegant device, in every bold idea, and in every person who dares to dream big and push boundaries. His farewell is the closing of a remarkable story, but also the opening of a legacy that continues to inspire generations. Conclusion: the legacy of Steve Jobs, forever. Steve Jobs may have left this world in 2011, but his legacy continues to live on, not just in products, but in people, in ideas, and in the spirit of innovation that fuels our modern world. His life was not merely a journey of business success. It was a story of passion, creativity, failure, reinvention, and above all, the fearless pursuit of excellence. From a modest garage in California to the grand stages of global product launches, Steve transformed himself from a curious young dreamer into one of the most influential visionaries of the 21st century. He didn't invent the computer, the phone, or the tablet, but he reimagined how these things could fit into our lives, how they could be more intuitive, more beautiful, and more human. He believed technology should serve the heart as much as the mind. That belief became the soul of Apple, and it remains at the core of everything the company does to this day. Steve's legacy isn't just about the iPhone or the iMac or the iPad. It's about thinking differently. It's about daring to go against the grain, challenging the status quo, and believing in what's possible even when the world says it's not. He showed us that failure isn't the end. It's just a step towards something greater. After being pushed out of Apple, he didn't give up. He built Next and nurtured Pixar into a storytelling powerhouse that changed the world of animation forever. When he returned to Apple, he didn't just bring back innovation, he brought back purpose, simplicity, and soul. Through his design philosophy, he taught us that less is more, that every detail matters, and that great work is born when art meets engineering. Jobs made technology feel like magic and made millions feel empowered through it. Even now, long after his passing, Steve Jobs continues to inspire entrepreneurs, artists, engineers, designers, and dreamers across the globe. His story is told in classrooms, business, meetings, and documentaries, not because of what he built, but how he built it, with intensity, imagination, and an unwavering belief that life is short and must be lived with intention. He reminded us to follow our hearts, trust our intuition, and chase what truly matters. In his unforgettable Stanford University speech, he said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." Those words have become a compass for those seeking meaning and courage in their own journeys. The legacy of Steve Jobs is forever, not only because of what he created, but because of what he stood for. He stood for vision. He stood for elegance. He stood for pushing the limits of what we believe is possible. Every time we swipe a screen, FaceTime a loved one, or create something new on a MacBook, we're part of the world Steve helped shape. His fingerprints are everywhere, not just in our devices, but in our dreams, in our expectations of quality, and in our belief that technology can be beautiful, personal, and empowering. Steve Jobs didn't just change the way we use tools. He changed the way we see the future. And that, more than anything, is why his legacy will live on forever.